They say that some people never accept when their children grow up and get married, but I never expected my mother-in-law would go to such extreme lengths to sabotage my career and destroy my reputation in order to break up my marriage. My name is Marcus, and this is the story of how discovering my mother-in-law's systematic campaign to ruin my professional life led me to orchestrate a revenge so devastating that it exposed her manipulative nature and ended her ability to interfere in our marriage forever. My wife Emma and I had been married for 4 years when I began to notice some unusual patterns in my professional life that seemed too coincidental to be random. I worked as a project manager for a mid-sized consulting firm, and I had built a solid reputation for delivering successful projects and maintaining strong client relationships. Emma's mother, Patricia, had never been particularly supportive of our marriage. She had made it clear from the beginning that she didn't think I was good enough for her daughter, and she frequently made comments about Emma deserving someone with better career prospects and higher income potential. Patricia was a retired human resources executive who had spent decades working in corporate environments, and she often used her professional experience to criticize my career choices and advancement strategies. She would suggest that I wasn't ambitious enough or that I was making poor decisions that would limit my earning potential. I had always tried to maintain a respectful relationship with Patricia despite her criticism, primarily because Emma was close to her mother and valued their relationship. Emma would often defend her mother's comments as coming from a place of concern and experience, rather than malice or disapproval. However, about 6 months into what I now recognize as Patricia's campaign against me, I began experiencing a series of professional setbacks that seemed unusually frequent and severe. Client relationships that had been strong for years suddenly became strained. Projects that should have been straightforward encountered unexpected complications, and my reputation within the company began to suffer. The first major incident occurred when a long-term client suddenly terminated a contract that we had been working on for months, citing concerns about my project management approach and communication style. This was particularly surprising because I had maintained an excellent relationship with this client for over 2 years, and they had consistently praised my work in previous projects. When I asked the client for specific feedback about what had gone wrong, they mentioned that they had received some concerning information about my professional background and work history that had made them question whether I was the right person to manage their project. I was confused and concerned about what kind of information they might have received, since my professional background was solid and my work history was well documented and positive. When I pressed for more details, the client became evasive and simply said that they had decided to go in a different direction. Similar incidents began occurring with increasing frequency over the following months. Other clients started questioning my competence and reliability, and I began hearing rumors within my company that there were concerns about my performance and professional judgment. Most troubling of all, I discovered that some of my colleagues and supervisors had been receiving anonymous communications that raised questions about my integrity and work ethic. These communications included allegations about missed deadlines, poor client relationships, and unprofessional behavior that were either completely false or grossly exaggerated versions of minor incidents. The anonymous communications were sophisticated and appeared to come from someone with detailed knowledge of corporate environments and human resources practices. They were carefully crafted to raise concerns without making specific accusations that could be easily disproven, and they created an atmosphere of doubt and suspicion around my professional reputation. I began to suspect that someone was deliberately sabotaging my career, but I couldn't understand who would have both the motivation and the knowledge necessary to conduct such a systematic campaign against me. The attacks were too well-informed and strategically planned to be random, and they seemed designed specifically to damage my professional relationships and career prospects. The situation reached a crisis point when my supervisor called me into a meeting to discuss what he described as ongoing concerns about my performance and professional conduct. He explained that the company had been receiving complaints and negative feedback about my work, and that they were considering whether I was still a good fit for my current role. I was devastated by this conversation because I knew that my actual work performance was strong, and that the complaints were either false or based on misrepresentations of normal workplace situations. But I also realized that my reputation within the company had been so damaged that it would be difficult to rebuild trust and credibility. That evening, I discussed the situation with Emma, hoping that she would provide support and help me understand what might be happening. Instead, Emma's reaction was surprisingly unsympathetic. and she suggested that perhaps the problems at work were a sign that I needed to reconsider my career path and make some changes. Emma also mentioned that her mother had been concerned about my career stability and had suggested that perhaps I should consider looking for opportunities in different industries or with different companies. She seemed to think that Patricia's advice might be worth considering, given her extensive corporate experience. This conversation troubled me because Emma's response seemed to align too closely with Patricia's long-standing criticism of my career choices. It also seemed suspicious that Patricia would be offering career advice at the exact time when my professional life was falling apart. I decided to conduct a more thorough investigation of the attacks on my professional reputation to try to identify who was behind them and how they were being carried out. I began documenting every incident and analyzing the patterns and timing of the various problems I had been experiencing. What I discovered was shocking and confirmed my worst suspicions about Patricia's involvement in my professional troubles. The anonymous communications that had been sent to my clients and colleagues contained information and perspectives that were remarkably similar to the criticisms that Patricia had been making about my career for years. More importantly, I discovered that several of the people who had received anonymous communications about me had also been contacted by someone claiming to be a former colleague or client who wanted to share concerns about my professional conduct. When I investigated these contacts, I found that they had all been made by someone using false identities and contact information. The most damning evidence came when I traced the timing of the various attacks on my reputation and compared them to Patricia's visits to our house and her conversations with Emma. There was a clear pattern showing that new incidents would occur within days or weeks of Patricia spending time with us and learning details about my work projects and client relationships. I realized that Patricia had been using the information she gathered during family visits to identify my clients and colleagues, and then she had been contacting them anonymously to plant seeds of doubt about my professional competence and integrity. She had been systematically destroying my career as part of a deliberate campaign to undermine my marriage to Emma. Patricia's strategy was sophisticated and malicious. She understood corporate environments well enough to know exactly how to damage someone's professional reputation without leaving obvious evidence of her involvement. She had been using her HR experience to craft communications that would be taken seriously by business professionals. Most importantly, I understood that Patricia's ultimate goal was not just to damage my career, but to create enough financial and professional stress in our marriage that Emma would begin to question whether she had made the right choice in marrying me. She wanted to drive a wedge between Emma and me by making me appear to be a professional failure. The most painful aspect of Patricia's campaign was realizing that she had been exploiting Emma's trust and love to gather the information she needed to attack me. Every conversation Emma had with her mother about my work had been used as intelligence to plan new attacks on my professional relationships. I also understood that Patricia's advice to Emma about my career had been designed to reinforce the narrative that I was professionally incompetent and that our marriage was suffering because of my career failures. She had been manipulating Emma's perceptions to make her question our relationship. I decided that Patricia needed to face consequences for her systematic campaign to destroy my career and my marriage, but I wanted to gather comprehensive evidence of her activities before confronting her. I wanted her to understand that her manipulation had been discovered and documented, and that she would face appropriate consequences for her actions. The plan I developed was designed to expose Patricia's sabotage campaign in a way that would be undeniable and devastating to her reputation and her relationship with Emma. I wanted her to realize that her attempts to destroy my marriage had ultimately backfired and damaged her own credibility and family relationships. Phase 1 involved documenting the full extent of Patricia's sabotage campaign by gathering evidence of her anonymous communications, false identity contacts, and systematic attacks on my professional reputation. I wanted to create a comprehensive record of her malicious activities. Phase 2 involved investigating Patricia's methods and identifying all of the people and organizations she had contacted as part of her campaign against me. I wanted to understand the full scope of her activities and the damage she had caused. Phase 3 involved consulting with attorneys and professional advisors to understand my legal options for addressing Patricia's defamation and interference with my business relationships. I wanted to explore both civil and criminal remedies for her systematic attacks. Phase 4 was more personal and involved confronting Patricia with evidence of her sabotage campaign in a way that would force her to acknowledge what she had done and face the consequences of her actions. The final phase involved the legal and practical steps necessary to repair my professional reputation, hold Patricia accountable for her actions, and protect my marriage from her ongoing interference. The investigation phase took several weeks, during which I worked with a private investigator and a cybersecurity expert to trace the anonymous communications and false identity contacts that Patricia had been using. We were able to identify the email accounts, phone numbers, and other contact methods she had used to reach my clients and colleagues. The evidence we gathered was comprehensive and damning. Patricia had created multiple false identities and had been systematically contacting people in my professional network for over a year. She had been spreading false information about my work performance, my professional background, and my personal character. We also discovered that Patricia had been researching my clients and colleagues online to gather information about their businesses and their concerns, which she then used to craft more convincing and targeted attacks on my reputation. Her campaign had been sophisticated and well-planned. Most importantly, we found evidence that Patricia had been coordinating her attacks with information she gathered from Emma about my work projects and professional relationships. She had been exploiting her daughter's trust to gather intelligence for her sabotage campaign. The confrontation happened on a Sunday afternoon in October, exactly 14 months after I had first noticed the unusual patterns in my professional life. I had arranged for Patricia to come to our house for what she thought was a normal family dinner. But I had prepared a comprehensive presentation of all the evidence I had gathered about her sabotage campaign. Instead of the family dinner she expected, I presented Patricia with detailed documentation of every anonymous communication she had sent, records of every false identity she had used, and evidence of every attack she had made on my professional reputation over the previous year. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I had email records, phone logs, IP address traces, and witness statements that proved Patricia had been systematically sabotaging my career. I also had evidence showing how she had used information from Emma to target specific clients and colleagues. Patricia's reaction was initially one of shock and panic as she realized that her elaborate sabotage campaign had been discovered and documented in detail. She tried to deny the evidence at first, claiming that I had misunderstood coincidental events and that she had never contacted anyone about my work. But the evidence was too comprehensive and specific for her denials to be credible. I had documentation showing not just her attacks on my reputation, but also the methods she had used and the information sources she had exploited to plan her campaign. When Patricia realized that denial wasn't working, she changed tactics and tried to justify her actions by claiming that she had been trying to protect Emma from what she saw as my professional incompetence. She suggested that her interference had been motivated by concern for her daughter's future rather than malice toward me. But I was not interested in Patricia's attempts to rationalize her systematic sabotage of my career and my marriage. She had deliberately and maliciously attacked my professional reputation using false information and deceptive tactics, and she needed to face the consequences of her actions. Emma was present during this confrontation, and she was devastated to learn about her mother's campaign against me. She realized that Patricia had been exploiting their relationship to gather information that was then used to attack me, and she understood that her mother had been manipulating her perceptions about our marriage. That afternoon, I also revealed that I had consulted with attorneys about my legal options for addressing Patricia's defamation and interference with my business relationships. I told her that I planned to pursue both civil and criminal remedies to hold her accountable for the damage she had caused to my career and my reputation. I explained that Patricia's systematic campaign against me constituted defamation, interference with business relationships, and potentially criminal harassment. I wanted her to understand that she would face serious legal and financial consequences for her actions. Patricia was devastated to learn that her sabotage campaign could result in legal action and that she might face significant financial penalties for the damage she had caused. She begged me to handle the matter privately and suggested that we could resolve the issue through family counseling rather than legal proceedings. But I had already made the decision that Patricia needed to face appropriate consequences for her systematic attacks on my career and my marriage. Her sabotage campaign had caused serious damage to my professional reputation and had created significant stress in my relationship with Emma. The legal and financial consequences for Patricia were swift and comprehensive. I filed civil lawsuits against her for defamation, interference with business relationships, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. seeking damages for the harm her campaign had caused to my career and my reputation. The evidence I had gathered made these lawsuits straightforward and likely to succeed. Patricia's systematic use of false information and deceptive tactics to damage my professional relationships constituted clear violations of both civil and criminal law. I also shared the evidence of Patricia's activities with law enforcement authorities, who determined that her systematic harassment and defamation campaign warranted criminal investigation. She faced the possibility of prosecution for her malicious activities. Most importantly, I was able to begin the process of repairing my professional reputation by sharing the evidence of Patricia's sabotage campaign with my clients, colleagues, and supervisors. The documentation showed that the attacks on my reputation had been the result of a deliberate campaign of misinformation rather than legitimate concerns about my work performance. The most satisfying aspect of Patricia's exposure was watching her realize that her attempt to destroy my marriage by sabotaging my career had ultimately backfired and damaged her own relationship with Emma. Emma was horrified to learn about her mother's manipulation and deception, and she felt betrayed by Patricia's exploitation of their relationship. Patricia had thought she was being clever by using her corporate experience and her access to information about my work to conduct a sophisticated sabotage campaign. But she had failed to consider that her activities would eventually be discovered and that she would face serious legal and personal consequences. The legal proceedings were decisive and comprehensive. Patricia's defamation and interference with my business relationships were well documented through the evidence I had gathered, and she had no grounds to contest the lawsuits or to deny her responsibility for the damage she had caused. Patricia was required to pay significant financial damages for the harm her campaign had caused to my career and my reputation. She was also required to send written apologies and corrections to all of the people and organizations she had contacted with false information about me. Most importantly, the exposure of Patricia's sabotage campaign allowed me to rebuild my professional relationships and restore my reputation within my company and my industry. My clients and colleagues understood that the problems they had heard about were the result of a malicious campaign rather than actual performance issues. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of protecting professional information and being aware of how personal relationships can be exploited by people with malicious intentions. I learned that family members can sometimes be the source of the most damaging attacks. Looking back on this experience, I am proud of the way I handled the discovery of Patricia's sabotage campaign. I could have confronted her immediately when I first suspected her involvement, but instead I took the time to gather comprehensive evidence that exposed the full scope of her activities. The marriage that Patricia had tried to destroy through her attacks on my career was actually strengthened by the process of exposing her manipulation. Emma and I developed a deeper understanding of each other and a stronger commitment to protecting our relationship from outside interference. Patricia's sabotage campaign had been a systematic attack on both my professional life and my marriage, but it had also revealed the strength of my relationship with Emma and my ability to overcome malicious attacks through careful investigation and appropriate legal action. The revenge I orchestrated against Patricia was comprehensive and devastating, but it was also necessary to protect my career and my marriage from her ongoing interference. She had chosen to use her corporate experience and her family relationships to attack me, and she had to face the full consequences of those choices. The professional relationships that Patricia had tried to destroy through her sabotage campaign were ultimately strengthened by the exposure of her activities. My clients and colleagues gained a deeper appreciation for my integrity and professionalism when they learned about the attacks I had endured. In the end, Patricia's systematic campaign against me had achieved the opposite of what she had intended. Instead of destroying my marriage and my career, her attacks had ultimately strengthened both and had resulted in serious legal and personal consequences for her. The most important outcome of this entire experience was that I was able to protect my marriage and my career from Patricia's malicious interference while also holding her accountable for her systematic attacks. Emma and I were able to build a stronger relationship based on mutual trust and protection from outside manipulation. The evidence that had exposed Patricia's sabotage campaign served as a reminder that systematic attacks on someone's reputation ultimately leave traces that can be discovered and documented. Patricia's sophisticated approach and corporate experience had ultimately been no match for thorough investigation and legal action. Patricia learned that using professional skills and family relationships for malicious purposes comes with consequences that extend far beyond the immediate goals they are meant to achieve. She lost her relationship with Emma, her reputation in the community, and her freedom from legal consequences. She discovered that the trust and love of family members, once broken through systematic betrayal and manipulation, could not be easily repaired or replaced. Her campaign against me had destroyed not just our relationship, but also her relationship with her own daughter. The revenge was complete, the truth was exposed, and Emma and I were finally free to build our marriage without Patricia's interference and manipulation. I had won not just a legal victory in the civil proceedings, but a personal victory that validated my commitment to protecting our relationship from malicious attacks. Looking forward, I carried with me the lessons I had learned about the importance of professional security, the need to investigate suspicious patterns, and the value of comprehensive documentation when facing systematic attacks. The experience had been professionally damaging and personally stressful, but it had also been educational and ultimately strengthening for my marriage. I had learned that I was capable of handling sophisticated attacks with strategic thinking and appropriate legal action. Patricia's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of using professional skills and family relationships for malicious purposes, and about the way that systematic attacks on someone's reputation ultimately create more evidence and more serious consequences than isolated incidents. Her downfall served as a reminder that exploiting family trust for malicious purposes is ultimately self-destructive, and that systematic campaigns against someone's professional reputation ultimately leave traces that can be used to hold perpetrators accountable. The professional relationships that had been meant to be destroyed by Patricia's sabotage campaign had instead become stronger through the process of exposing her attacks. My clients and colleagues gained a deeper understanding of my character and integrity through witnessing how I handled the malicious campaign against me. In the end, the revenge was not just about holding Patricia accountable for her sabotage campaign or repairing the damage she had caused to my reputation. It was about protecting my marriage and my career from malicious interference, and about proving that systematic attacks will ultimately be discovered and punished. The family relationship that Patricia had exploited and corrupted through her manipulation was replaced by a stronger marriage built on mutual protection and shared commitment to defending our relationship from outside attacks. Her sabotage campaign had been devastating and professionally damaging, but it had also been educational, and Emma and I were determined to use those lessons to build a stronger marriage based on the values that truly mattered to us. Patricia's systematic attacks and the elaborate deception she had constructed to carry them out had ultimately cost her everything that should have mattered to her: her relationship with her daughter, her reputation in the community, and her freedom from legal consequences. The professional evidence that exposed her sabotage campaign and the documentation that proved her systematic attacks served as permanent reminders that malicious campaigns against someone's reputation ultimately leave traces that can be discovered and used to hold perpetrators accountable. The revenge was complete, justice was served, and Emma and I were finally free to move forward with our marriage, knowing that I had handled one of the most sophisticated forms of personal and professional attack with dignity, strategic thinking, and unwavering commitment to truth and legal accountability.